Hitting revenue targets is hard and requires constant hustle. Last quarter's success is already forgotten. Learn the mindset and tactics of today's most successful revenue producers in B2B marketing and sales. We call this the Revenue Hustle. I'm your host, Tom Hessen, navigating you on this journey. Today's show is sponsored by 9 Lenses, an interactive assessment platform that enables you to add instant value to your buyers and allows your sales team to tailor business conversations focused on the pain points each and every time. Check them out at 9lenses.com. Good afternoon. My name is Tom Hessen, the host of the Revenue Hustle, and I am very pleased to share with you our next guest, Russ Gould, who is a longtime marketing executive, specifically in the areas of demand gen and product marketing. Russ, I want to give you a formal introduction in a minute, but I wanted to say welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Tom. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I know many of you may not know Russ. I've had the fortunate opportunity to get to know him over the past few weeks, and I just want to share a conversation with him. You know, he's been an executive at NextGen Healthcare, Kofax, and Kyriba, to just mention a few places he's been in his career. He's got a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge in the realm of B2B marketing, and so I was just jumped at the opportunity to have Russ on the show. So, Russ, welcome. Why don't you take a minute to just introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks. Good start and intro by you. I've spent a lot of time in my career really in product marketing as well as demand generation. I think the two are very much attached at the hip. I think they're very important skill sets that a demand gen person and a product marketer brings to the table that I think is particularly important in these days when account-based marketing is something that's becoming much more important for many marketing organizations today.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm just going to let you jump right in. Everyone kind of knows we do revenue rules here on the Revenue Hustle. So Russ, what is your revenue rule?
So my revenue rule, Tom, is account-based marketing is not just for marketing. ABM is really a go-to-market strategy and a team sport that really requires the revenue teams, sales, marketing, and solutions all to be highly collaborative and working together very tightly for those achieving those higher returns on investment.
Okay, well, ABM is a hot topic. I'm so glad that you wanted to bring this up and talk about it today. I mean, let's just define in your mind what ABM is, and then we'll get into the team sport and the go-to-market. But just in your view, what is ABM, and maybe what is it not?
So ABM takes a lot of what we've learned to date and, pulls it all together in terms of what we've got in terms of technology and information and data, and pulls that together in a very highly targeted fashion where instead of just targeting individuals, we're actually targeting accounts as well as the individuals at those accounts, as well as identifying those buyer groups as well. So it's a different approach that builds on really what's come before it. I mean, it's very similar. Christine spoke about sales marketing alignment and Jeff flipping the funnel. Today's topic, ABM, fits really with both of those. A successful ABM program requires, as I mentioned, that tight sales and marketing collaboration, right? And, doing and executing campaigns jointly. And an ABM approach requires really the revenue teams to flip the funnel, a different F, shall we say, but the revenue rule here is
that's episode 2,
not just for marketing.
Yes. Okay. And so we take a different approach, and that's why I think you're saying it's not just for marketing. It's just not marketing out there, running campaigns online, doing digital marketing. You really need sales and others. So when you say like a go-to-market, is that what you mean by that? That it's a joint effort?
That's correct. As the company, goes to the market, and in this case, we're talking about the product teams as well, but principally sales and marketing. It's a different way in which we do it. So, the traditional way is marketing executes all its campaigns and its strategy and campaigns and tactics. and work with individuals, have that conversation that marketing has with individuals through their buyer journey. And at some point they are qualified and then go to sales. What's different here in terms of ABM is that we really are flipping that funnel and building out first those targets in a much more in-depth way. So we start with, many organizations will start with an ideal customer profile, ICP. Now, an ICP isn't new. Of course, when we did ICPs 15 years ago, we probably were limited to firmographic information as well as maybe some technographic information about that particular account. Firmographic for the account meaning, how large is it in terms of revenues, maybe the number of employees, what industry segment is it in, those kinds of things. And marketing would do their top of funnel activities and everything would drip and waterfall through the funnel. Today with ABM, we're flipping that funnel and putting things like, targeting demand in terms of determining the right accounts first through firmographic information, but then going beyond that. And, one of the relatively new capabilities is having intent information, right? Whether it's for accounts or contacts, and seeing that they're in the market. So we have software or technology that enables us to listen to the market and see if there's certain intent around topics that are important to us. In addition to that, we can also start to do some demographic scoring around individuals or buying groups, as well as starting to prioritize these organizations and individuals, also around their behavior score, which groups are going to be ready to maybe move to another stage. So there's a lot more of this targeting work that gets done up front, more so than ever before. It's not that targeting is new. I mean, heck, everybody should have been doing targeting 15 years ago. But for ABM definitely to work, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we get to it, you got to be much more highly targeted because there is a much higher level of effort. So no more spray and pray, no more random acts of marketing, that's for sure.
I like that. And so is that a joint exercise? Is the targeting something that both sales and marketing kind of do together? I mean, it kind of goes to your point that ABM is a team sport. So does it start with sales and marketing coming up with the ideal customer profile and then the accounts?
It does. It very much starts with sales and marketing working together. In a lot of organizations, that ideal customer profile, individuals will say, hey, start with sales and have conversation with others in the organization to build that ICP. That's fine. Definitely talk to others. But in terms of building it out, it needs to be data-based, right? So it can't be just people's opinions. I walked into a company probably a decade ago and 25,000 customers, and everybody said the company they rocked in financial services, right? And so went through a statistical ICP analysis, based on lifetime value and a few other things. And when you looked at some of the characteristics, the company was good in the financial services market with those organizations that were between 1 and 3 billion. Anything above, anything below, they were awful. But everybody knew, right? So that's what I mean by it has to be data-based. Otherwise, you're not going to end up with the right information as much. And there's a lot of data and information today that enables you to do that.
Right. And so as you think, now we get the targeting, right? So it starts with flipping the funnel, identifying your ideal customer profile, the companies that you think are the best fit, right? Now, do you go to individuals at that company? So what happens next?
Sure. So I'll say it the way you said it, just a little bit a different way, right? The bottom line here is what we're trying to do, right, is find and prioritize our vested accounts, right, that ICP that are in the market now. And in the market now means, they're showing intent. Because if you think about it, if only 30% of your target market might be in market, right? And I'm going to execute something like ABM that requires a lot more resources and a lot more work. I want to make this as much of a rifle shot as I can, right?
Right.
As opposed to, broad brush. So, but yes, definitely what you're doing is we're looking at the accounts, we're looking at the individuals, we're looking at those groups of individuals that make up the buyer groups, and targeting those individuals with some highly personalized engagement.
And so as we talk about ABM, and we're going to talk about sales, this part of this conversation. So this is really trying to target the folks in market, right? So that's with kind of like the intent data you're talking about, or as close, because you don't know which 30% is in market, right? Without something like that, this is a very different tactic than, let's call it brand marketing, which is just out there trying to kind of define a space, own a space, and kind of get your name out there, which would be, someone buys today, tomorrow, 6 months, a year from now, that you want them to think of you first, right? This is a very different, like you said, a rifle shot versus a broad brush. It's called maybe like brand marketing or more demand generation activities. Is that just, I want to paint a picture there, kind of how you see the difference of those two?
Sure. And you're spot on. There is a difference. At one level, it's kind of subtle, shall we say, because, marketing to accounts versus account-based marketing kind of sounds the same. So what's different, right? And when I'm marketing to accounts, I'm targeting those accounts. I'm identifying them and targeting them. So what's different, right? The difference is that, as you mentioned, we're going beyond just the fit in terms of the target accounts, and we're looking for very account-specific insights on the personas of the individuals, the buyer group, right, or even verified buyer group or the extended contact network within the organization, right? And in addition to that, what's also different is this concept or idea that, to your point, sales and marketing are working more tightly together. Whereas before it was marketing handled one portion of the buyer journey, qualified it, handed off to sales for this next part of the buyer journey. That's different now. You're doing it all kind of together as one buyer journey, not separate. And that's where this tight collaboration comes in between the two groups.
Right. Okay. So we're going down this ABM journey here. We've got our accounts, we've got our people. So what are some of the things that happen next? Like in terms of the targeting, the messaging, how do you really market to an account?
Okay. So before I answer that question, I'm going to back us up because I need to set it up.
Right? I jump the gun. Yes.
No, not too much, right? But and what I'm going to talk about here is kind of how organizations segment these targets we're talking about in an ABM program, because not all members of an ABM program are created equal. Okay. And one way for, the listeners to think about this, and they're going to have to visualize, right? Think of a pyramid, okay, with 3 tiers in that pyramid. The top tier, which would be the smallest tier, is where we identify those organizations or accounts where we're going to do one-to-one marketing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But the way to think of that in terms of that one-to-one, this means that we have a bespoke campaign, right? So think of a tailored outfit that is designed for you, the individual, right? Same thing here with these bespoke one-to-one campaigns to particular accounts. The next tier down, a little bit bigger, is what is referred to as kind of one to few. In the one-to-one, you're going to have, depending on the size of the organization, you're going to have a handful of accounts. The next second tier down, one to few, you might have a dozen or dozens, depending on the size of your organization. And then the third one at the bottom is one to many. And one to many, there might be 100 or hundreds of accounts, depending on the organization.
Right.
Now, in terms of those tiers, that's very important to kind of answering your last question in terms of, well, what do we do, right?
Now I see why you backed
up. It depends on, where we are in terms of who are we talking about. Are we talking that bespoke one-to-one, right? Or the one to few and the one to many. And the one to many that starts to look much more, regular marketing. However, the other thing you can think about in terms of this pyramid in these tiers is the level of personalization. So at the top level, that one-to-one, super, and that's why I use the word bespoke, super high level of personalization. As I go to one to few, yeah, I'm still doing some personalization. I might be doing it at a segment level and persona levels, or at one to many, I'm doing a little bit less personalization, right? It's less personalized. But this concept of personalization is really fundamental to the engagement and really fundamental, in my opinion, why ABM is showing such great results and why people are excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because we as marketers all know that, and sales folks, right, all know that the more personalized the information is to that particular individual, right, heck, or that buying group, or even that account for that matter, the better results we're going to get. Because we're trying to have a conversation with someone on a mass scale, right? And the more personalized it is, it's almost like it's more closely to the conversation you and I are having, right? The closer we can mimic that on a mass scale, the better off we're going to be.
Right.
In so many ways, and that's why ABM is getting some of the hype that not hype, but is so hot today.
I gotcha. Okay, so now I'm guessing all the actual tactics you take will vary based on these three categories, right? And so I think, well, take me through that, because I think we talk about super personalized. I have a bunch of ideas that I'm just implementing in 9 lenses as we speak, right? I mean, like this is great because I'm not a marketer by trade. I'm learning marketing very quickly. I come more from the sales side of the house. And so you're painting a very clear picture in my mind as to what ABM is and what it isn't. And I know we're only I don't know if we're halfway through the ABM journey yet, but take me to the next step.
Sure. So you want to talk tactics a little bit, right? And the goal is still the same, but from a sales and marketing perspective, right? We're trying to seamlessly orchestrate multi-touch, multi-channel sales and marketing plays, right, or campaigns. And so, well, gee, what tactics do I use? Well, the full complement of tactics is still available to sales and marketing. The thing that organizations need to focus on are the ones they know that are working, right? So this isn't about doing that. You don't have to do something different. It's because it's ABM. From a tactics perspective, it's still the same fundamentals. Pick those tactics, channels that are working, and continue to use those. Don't limit the tactics. Some may say, hey, I'm going to do high value, high touch items and mailers because it's ABM. You might be using that depending on the group that you're going to, right? Whether it's a certain type of C-level or a particular buyer group or individual, you might want to do those things. But again, it's really sticking with the fundamentals in terms of really understanding what's working for you in your organization and continue to use those things. I mean, as part of that too, you've got to be thinking through that buyer journey, right? All the way through, right? You still have to make them aware, but you don't have to do it from a broad-based media brand thing. You can do digital in a very targeted way.
Right.
We can do digital today where I can, unbeknownst to me, somebody is out, visiting a lot of different sites. And so intent can be figured out in terms of their intent. I don't yet know who they are at that account, but I know that account is one of my targets. And I can serve up a, Google display ad to that, without me, lifting a finger, right? So again, being able to, personalize here is key in terms of these tactics. So it's the insights that really add a whole level of effort, those insights with the account, insight with the individuals, insight with the buyer group.
Right. And so some of those tactics, I mean, I guess obviously can vary. Like you said, you could mail someone something with a personalized note, right, or a gift of some sort. With I've received mugs from the where I graduated, et cetera, that sort of thing, all the way. Like that's, I would say, highly personalized, probably less scalable, right? And then so some of these digital things, like I'm envisioning, you could create like let's say ads on LinkedIn, right, that have the brand of the person or the company that you're targeting, right? If you're targeting marketing or sales or IT, I mean, you could almost have ads specific to that company, right? That's got their name, their logos, there's something in there that catches their eye, right? Like, I'm just trying to, again, my toolbox of marketing tactics is not nearly as deep as yours. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what are some of the things that you've done or seen, tried either successfully or unsuccessfully to try to personalize either that top tier, second tier, just to kind of put a
Yep.
tactic to a name or concept.
Sure. So, okay. So two things. From a personalization perspective, and then we'll talk about specific tactics. Personalization can come in many forms, right? One of the key things, though, in terms of personalization is there's a lot more insider knowledge or information needed to be understood about the target, right? The more you know, the more personalized you can do. So, as I think about even a 9 Lenses interactive assessment, right? You're talking about tactics. That can be another way, as you very well know, right? I can generate higher engagement, right? Close more deals, right? Using that assessment. So that in itself is a tactic, right? And there are other things. I can do things in terms of, depending on the audience, and this I can even do it from a one to few perspective, or even somewhat many, right? Where you can do some customized video and put it into a direct mailer. But it's personalized to certain kinds of individuals, right? Not necessarily one-to-one, but one-to-few or one-to-many. Any of the other tactics I'm using in terms of nurturing, whether it's webinars, whether it's, emails, whether it's link, whether I'm doing anything from a paid digital perspective, whether it's LinkedIn, or if I'm doing something in Facebook, or, what am I doing from a Google perspective, or even third-party, content syndication avenues as well. And again, I can make those broad. I can put a piece of content in there that kind of crosses industries and things, or I can use that same tactic, but make it very, very finely personalized to a CFO in a particular industry at an account, that's this size, that has people, in market, right? And talk to that individual specifically.
Wow. Yeah, so you've got to, I guess, put your creative hat on sometimes to just kind of, and test, right? Like, because, every account may be slightly different in that regard. And I think that's why the tiering is so important in my mind, because once you recognize what tier these people fall into, it kind of allows you to allocate either resources or ideas that, going after the top tier, you can invest a lot more potentially than the other two categories, right? From a personalization and, from that perspective. I mean, I think one thing, I've always found personalization kind of fascinating, especially in kind of the B2B space. I've gotten various different things. There's been a whole book about personalization, a B2B marketer written by a cartoonist. The way he would get business would write and develop custom-made cartoons to his buyer, and then he would get his cartoons, syndicated in the newspaper. Which I think, again, there's so many different creative ways to get in front of people. I mean, one thing that we're doing right now is we are mocking up, we sell interactive assessment technology to marketers and sales reps. And so we are, this is probably, I would say, one to few in the category, but I wouldn't have said that until you just, shared that with me. We're mocking up our buyer's website with an interactive assessment on it, with a big old call to actions. Take your, cyber risk assessment, right? So we take their business, we'll build a screenshot of their website with an interactive assessment tailored to their solutions, and or sending it via email. And so it's still a little early to know, but when someone sees their website in an email, it's like it connects very quickly. So that's kind of like one idea that I'm hearing. Again, I'm thinking, should we do that on LinkedIn? There's a lot of different ways we could reach people beyond just direct email to kind of canvas the buyer group that we're probably not just touching.
Absolutely. It's a great example. And the cartoonist, is that Marketunist? Is that the one you're talking about?
I can't remember off the top of my head what the name of
Okay.
the book was, but it's all about
So,
personalization.
so I used an individual at a previous company where it was cartoons, right? And obviously it was customized to our market. These weren't general things, right? And we were the only ones doing it, but they became something that created a lot of good word of mouth, right? They got used, the cartoons got used in internal presentations of prospects and customers. And yeah, this is probably a one-to-many thing, but who cares, right? They were able to take this in some of the cartoons and make it much more personal for their particular organization.
Right. No, that's really clever. All right. So now we've gone through some tactics. So how does this look like in execution, right? Because I mean, we haven't really touched on the sales part, right? The team element yet. So we've got marketing. Again, I guess, does sales contribute to the campaign tactics, right? Like a cartoon versus, a college mug or, so are they involved in some of that as part of that process?
They can, depending how it's happening. So a couple things. So think of it from an execution perspective. When an organization is dealing with a prospect, right, there are multiple touches, right? The engagement crosses multiple tactics, right, over a period of time. And so what we've done, and obviously everybody is doing in this area, not everybody, but most, is that when we're building out a campaign, that it's really one of these, maybe the salesperson is doing something first, then marketing has a couple of pieces of engagement, and then it's a salesperson, or marketing starts it, and after they've done something, the salesperson's calling up directly. So there's kind of a simplistic way to think about how that, works and happens. Also, in terms of execution, what's important is the engagement internally, right? This collaboration we talked about earlier.
Right.
And different organizations are at, different levels of maturity in terms of, how they work together between sales and marketing. Some, it's very limited in terms of the, integration and working together, where maybe it's, the annual plan, and they might or may look at, getting together on a quarterly basis. At the other end of the spectrum, which is where I found it to be extremely effective, is there is monthly, if not bi-weekly and weekly meetings where you're actually going through things and looking at results on even a weekly basis and making adjustments. So back to your test comment, right? Even more than test, get out and get, real feedback from, the target audience, and adjust your program there. So in a much more mature, ABM mature organization, they have a much more comprehensive approach to collaboration between the teams. But what I've seen is, and experienced directly with my teams, is the results we get by doing that. It's unbelievable. Because if your sales teams, there's all bits and pieces here, right? If your sales teams are socially enabled, right, and understand social selling, they're already connected in, right? They've got alerts, marketing's providing them content. They're becoming a little bit of a mini thought leader in their patch, right? And again, we're talking, the one-to-one, one-to-few that we know are in market, right? So these aren't cold ones that you don't want getting anywhere near your sales executive reps, right? But with that profile of individual who's doing all those things, the response rate to even a C-level type campaign at one of these ABM target accounts is significantly higher when that salesperson is part of the journey and calls in, as opposed to using a BDR or an SDR, kind of calling in cold. So there's a lot of different ways that organizations are doing this, right? This isn't a cookie cutter thing. It's something that, an organization, and you don't have to be a large organization to execute on ABM. You can be a smaller organization without dedicated resources to do ABM. The difference will be the scale.
Yeah. Now one of the questions I keep thinking about is, given if you're a small organizations and you can't do brand marketing and ABM and all these different forms of marketing that are out there, what do you think is the right, or what's the most important thing to do? Like, I'm a smaller organization, right? Do I do ABM and go after my one-to-ones and my one-to-fews, rather than trying to educate the entire marketplace about interactive assessments and how they help marketers and salespeople, and just try to broad brush, right? That people aren't out there looking for something like what we do. So I'm just kind of curious, just kind of like, where does the ABM stand in the marketing stack, if you can't do all the different forms of marketing that many are doing?
Well, and being smaller, you can't get to that level of personalization, right? It's just the resources aren't there to do it. So, but I think there are ways to still execute, even if it's not hyper personalized. To go through an exercise, and you don't need to do statistical software to help to build your ideal customer profile in terms of your targets. And then go through and, like any marketing program, whether it's ABM or not, we talked a lot about it at targets. And so trying to figure out who's engaging, right? Using those tactics that may or may not even work, right? I mean, obviously you want the ones that worked, but you want to test out and try some others that you haven't done yet. And you can still use some of the constructs. You're just not going to use it at the scale that others might, right?
Right.
Or you might have to take a flyer, being smaller, right? And say, hey, we're going to try it, with this one or two, right? Again, to your point of testing, right? Or do I say, hey, I'm going to do it much broader. I'm going to go after 50 because I know these 50, right, fit my profile because the existing clients we've gotten to date match that profile. So I'll go mine where I've already mined before.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's, because I think as a small sales and marketing organization, I could target a handful of accounts and move the needle, right? Rather trying to get a volume play of not knowing, right? So it's like I could go super personalized and go after a few larger accounts that could really change the dynamics, or maybe a notch below, right? So that's how I'm thinking about it, is just for my own business, is go after one-to-ones in a highly personalized way, and then maybe some one-to-fews, that's dozens of accounts. And then, maybe the one-to-many is the harder thing to do, because maybe it's easier to do the marketing, but it may be harder to get the message out with limited resources. Right, I can't run thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of ad campaigns to blanket the market and educate the market, and send free T-shirts to everybody. I mean, it's like I can't do those sorts of things. I can't buy the market, so to speak. It's amazing how some companies can just invest so much in customer acquisition, and whether it's profitable or not, sometimes it's oftentimes not, at least until the second or third year potentially. That's certainly not the situation for many of us today.
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on.
Well, Russ, that's really a great discussion on ABM. I know you had a second revenue rule, which is connected. So why don't you tell us your second revenue rule?
Well, the second revenue rule is that, ABM results are directly correlated to experience. Okay, so this isn't just about marketing. That was the first one. But so what this says is, if you haven't done ABM yet, get started right away. Do it immediately, right? Because the research has shown there is this direct correlation between ABM effectiveness and maturity of the team. Now, I'm not suggesting here that an organization partakes in one of these, shoot, ready, aim approaches. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just recommending don't spend forever in plan mode, and get going and start executing so that you get the feedback from the marketplace so that you can adjust, right? Get out there, make some things happen, and iterate based on the information and feedback or data that you're getting with the results in terms of what you're running.
And
it's kind of one of those
why is that? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say it's kind of like one of those immediate improvement versus postponed perfection kind of thing. So
No, I can see that because there's a learning curve, obviously, as you just kind of get in there. Um, and so is that just, where's that learning coming from? Is it just all the different coordination and the momentum and the learnings that happen just by doing, right? Just it, I think most things, I subscribe to that opinion. You're better off just starting, because whatever you do, you're just going to get better. And this seems to
Mhm.
be just marketing and sales working together. That's not always common. And now you're doing different coordinations, different tactics, techniques. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of learning there. But is that the crux of?
Absolutely, all the above, right? To your point, Christine talked about alignment, and alignment is still a stretch for some sales and marketing teams, right? With this, to be really successful, you're going way beyond alignment, right? This is integrated, jointly executing, orchestrating campaigns or plays to particular accounts, right?
Right.
Not a lot of experience there, right? Um, and learning where it might be better to have an exec call, a sales rep call, right, at an early point in the process, whereas previously you would have said, no way, we don't want them calling them, right? We want the marketing engine to build it up and have the SDR or BDR. Look, it's something new and different, and you've got to learn in terms of those kinds of things, right? Even like a little silly thing, like, if you talk about metrics a little bit, marketing qualified lead, MQL, pretty standard term, right? With ABM campaigns, as part of my metrics and measurement, should we be calling it MQA, marketing qualified account, right? Or
Right.
for that matter, SMQA, right? Sales and marketing qualified, account. So, I mean, there's just some of these things are subtle, some of them aren't. And to your point, getting the experience is really key to being even more effective.
And how do you know if you are effective, right? Like marketing is loaded with all sorts of kind of, people say vanity metrics, right? Like likes or shares or comments on a post, which again, there's value in that, right? But as we talk more and more about revenue marketing, right? How does marketing drive revenue? Attribution's a big thing today, so marketing can demonstrate ROI, which again is a very hard thing to do. Like, how do you view success as an ABM campaign kicks off and is running? How do you think about that?
Well, the thing I'll say is the metrics are important and measurement's important, right? If you don't measure it, it's probably not going to happen and it's not going to be successful. To your point, in terms of some of the vanity metrics, yeah, those are less applicable here.
Right.
And there are, hundreds of different measures that can be used. But, it's thinking about, I've got target accounts. How am I penetrating those accounts? How many of my targets are in pipeline, right? What's my opportunity rate for these target accounts? What's velocity? Velocity is something that isn't ABM specific, right? So there's a lot of these metrics and measures that you can pull together to really understand what's happening. I mean, there's all kinds of things I can do in terms of today with we talked about intent and surging and relationship scores between individuals, and looking at metrics from the tier perspective, right? Those different tiers we talked about, 1 to 1, 1 to few, 1 to many. I mean, I could go on and on, right? And you see a lot from some of the ABM platforms, right? They'll come even with some standard stuff that goes even beyond that, right? Cost per opportunity account, right?
Right.
So
I got you. No, that makes a lot of sense. And so why do you think some companies are doing this and why some aren't? Is it just a function of just they haven't gotten there? It's newish, right? I mean, I think a lot of technology's come a long way to kind of make this simpler. Like, what's holding companies back? I mean, have you seen any resistance to this notion, whether it be within marketing or sales, or how would you help a marketer get going?
So I think, the newish comment is pretty spot on, right? So it takes some people some time to get going with that. But back to your question in terms of why, I think, the marketers that are doing things right now from an ABM perspective are definitely achieving a higher ROI with ABM than any other marketing initiative that they're doing. And there's, plenty of research out there that supports that. And I think it's probably serious, 92% of B2B marketers are considering ABM extremely or very important. So it's one of those things. In terms of, for a marketer, I mean, it depends on the size of the organization, and, it takes any individual, it only takes one with some initiative, right? You don't have to boil the ocean, right? You can be a small organization and take some of the principles here relative to ABM and try to use those in a much smaller scale, right? You don't have to go out and do a complete formal, ICP using statistical software, right? Or any of the other, highly personalized things, but you can do it on a small scale. Maybe you do one campaign with a very small set of targets, right? And try maybe something that works somewhere else, but do it with this, one to few set of targets. And maybe there might be content. Here's another little one. Do a content audit, and organizations do this all the time, but do it in the context of ABM and thinking of putting an ABM campaign together and looking at that content from how can I make this more personalized, right? If I wrote it for multiple industries, how can I write it for one industry? If I already have it for one industry, how can I write it to this particular account? Or how can I write this particular piece that was to, this finance persona? How can I make it even more personalized to the personas in these few accounts, right? So there's still some things, and I think organizations will be surprised when they do that audit with that view. They'll be surprised to see how much you've already got that you can tweak. So it's kind of like the big term today is a hack. So it's a little hack, right? Using some of that existing content and then tweaking it to make it much more personalized. So you're not starting from scratch, right? It's just kind of going through and tweaking a bit.
Right. Now, one other thing that kind of comes to mind is, how does this typically get structured inside of a marketing team?
So it depends. And it's back to that maturity level in terms of the teams. So some organizations can execute ABM without a dedicated ABM resource, right? So that's kind of one level. The next step would be there's one individual that's dedicated to ABM, and it starts to grow from there. From the far extreme, on the one hand, you got no dedicated resource. To the other extreme, in a large organization, they're probably going to have a global ABM, individual or group, right? They're also going to have field marketing that's doing ABM. They might even have an ABM COE or center of excellence,
right?
That is helping kind of drive a lot of what might be happening across the organization, or somewhat controlling and making sure it's sensible across the organization with all these disparate teams. So it's kind of this broad spectrum of how it gets set up within marketing organizations.
Well, you brought up field marketing, and again, I've got you as a hostage here, so I get to ask the questions that I am trying to get answers to. I mean, tell me about field marketing and ABM. Like, what does that look like, right? Because I think of field marketing as events out in the field, right? It could be in a trade show, but it could be at a dinner, right, where you're inviting people to, with people in town. So just, I'm still kind of fascinated with field marketing, because I've never been in that big of an organization to know what that looks like at a much bigger firm. So I'm just curious, kind of your view on field marketing and maybe even how it relates to ABM.
That's absolutely relates. So I'll use the example you set the table with here. in terms of events, right? I might I'm a field marketer and I've got, I'm tied to a patch or an area, right? And I do events in that little patch, right? And I bring people together. Okay, now I'm that field marketer and I'm doing ABM things. Well, now I'm not thinking in terms of multiple accounts. I'm going to put together events, a series of events for that particular account. So I'm going to do, whether it's a lunch and learn or whether it's some kind of executive briefing, it's this, that. There's all kinds of things I can do just from an event perspective that I do to that individual account that is personalized to that account. So another way to, one of the differences, with classic or, ABM is that, now I forgot the term I was going to use here. I'll have to come back to it. But it made me think, it's, from a marketing perspective, right? We think of markets in terms of segments and things like that, right? And you're marketing to that segment. With ABM, really the account is that market, right? So to your example, and ask about field marketing, right? And the field marketer does things to multiple accounts in their area that they're responsible for, region they're responsible for. Now they're going to look at things. That market isn't all that. It's the particular account or the few accounts that they're going to deal with, and still use, again, all those bags in their trick, right? Whether it's lunch and learns, executive kinds of briefings, thought leadership things, bringing in an analyst that's only going to talk to that firm about, their stuff, right? It's not for the others. It's not going to make sense, right? Because they have a certain initiative, right? From a corporate perspective. And so you're bringing in an analyst that really understands that and speaks to them in their leadership, right?
No, that's a great example. So I'm glad I asked that question. So, well, I could ask a lot more questions, and I just want to be conscious of time, and you've been very generous with yours. So just to kind of close things out, Russ, help us just kind of understand your journey through your marketing career. How did you get into marketing? How have you kind of landed the roles that you have, and just take us through that.
Sure. So I actually started as a programmer analyst. Ended up on a team that was marketing some technology within the organization I was at, and that got me interested in marketing. Went back and got the MBA, and from there, got myself, wanted to be much more central to the business than I was as a programmer, and really started my marketing career that way. More on the product side, but I've kept moving more and more and more away from the technology. Of course, demand generation today, marketing today, technology is fundamental, right? So It makes it all that much more fun for me today to be a marketer.
Wow. And so what are some of the parts of your job that you love? Maybe some of the parts that come a little harder or maybe less fun?
Well,
you mentioned technology, so you're very comfortable with the technology piece. So that's probably learning new technology, seeing it get implemented.
Yeah, technology obviously is one thing. There's some important skills there. The metrics and measurements and analytics is another thing. Personally, I've done some artificial intelligence before that I can't wait to use it in more direct marketing perspectives. I think the struggle is that there's always too much to do, or you always have to make choices, and so you don't get to do everything, right?
Right.
And you've got to make sure you're executing and driving, particularly from a demand gen perspective. You are driving pipeline, you are driving bookings, right? That is a key fundamental part of that role, where you're driving that and you're responsible for numbers, just like a sales team is, as Christine said, right? We in marketing have a number too, so we're attached at the hip that way. So, that comes with good and bad, right?
Yeah, right. The job never stops, right?
Exactly. So, but the good part of it is it really connects sales and marketing, right? It's no longer, hey, yeah, we're working together and we're attached to. No. We both have a number to hit, right? So.
Right. Right. Well, I think that's very encouraging. As I just talked to more marketers, I mean, more people see it as a team activity, right? Driving bookings and driving revenue. There's a lot of opportunities for, the cat fights and the details, right? And who gets what credit and all that kind of stuff. And that's just kind of the frenemies that is sales and marketing. But I do think that and that's just healthy, right? Tension of one team helping the other, and vice versa. And so like marketing wouldn't, be as good if they didn't hear the feedback from the front lines from sales, right? Sales certainly benefits from the work that marketing does at every stage of the buyer journey. And so it's really great to kind of see that come together. And I think the companies that do that well, obviously have a much better chance of driving revenue consistently than those that are, at each other's throats. So, well, thank you,
Absolutely.
Russ. This has been highly educational. I've gotten a whole book of notes here. I've got several ideas I'm going to take to my team after we hang up this call. So I hope everyone else will get as much value as I have. So thank you for coming on. Let's please do this again in the near future.
Okay, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. This was one of the fun things you get to do.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Russ. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to The Revenue Hustle. This episode has been brought to you by 9 Lenses. Close more deals with interactive assessments. Check them out at 9lenses.com. See you next time.